as far as Leipold goes, like my theory on this is like if there's so much more value to, like, if you're a card collector or something, you have an unopened pack of cards versus like the second you open them, or a Beanie Baby or something, you take it out of the packaging, like all of a sudden it's not as valuable. Like Leipold, there's just this kind of new car smell thing going on with him where it's bright, shiny, new. It just happened. Everybody thinks it was a good hire. They're impressed that Kansas didn't completely puke all over themselves in making a hire here. And I think that, I guess my point would be a year from now, after like a 1-11 season next year, which is probably what's going to happen, I don't think you see him nearly as high on this list, but it's so many of those things came together right now to put him. And I'm not even arguing about him being in front of Klieman. It's more like Neil Brown gets stuck behind both of those guys. Like how does that happen? I mean, Neil Brown has, I think, proven more than Klieman to this point, and he certainly has proven more than what Lance Leipold has.
Yeah, I had Neil Brown above both those guys, just barely, but above them. Going 2-0 against Klieman kind of swung me that direction, and I really like what they did at West Virginia last year. I think you mentioned this on your show the other day. They were kind of a fluke call away from beating Texas. Really, really could have very easily had a better record than they did. So I like what he's done. I think he's a rising coach. The interesting thing with Leipold is that, you can't argue with what he's done, right? Fastest coach ever to 100 wins, albeit at the Division III level, still on the resume. 3 straight bowls at Buffalo, first coach to ever do that. Never won a MAC championship, so that kind of, I think some people maybe don't realize that. I think when people say, oh, he had all the success at Buffalo, I think people maybe assume he had at least one conference championship. Never happened. Lost twice in the MAC championship game. Never actually won it. I think he's a good coach. Has some problems at Kansas, but until he proves it at the Power 5 level, I'm not going to just sit here and say he's better than all these other guys. I'll tell you that the hardest guy I had to rank on the whole list was Steve Sarkisian. What do you do with that guy? He's pretty mediocre at Washington, pretty mediocre at USC. Unbelievable as USC's offensive coordinator, but how hard is that to do? And now he's head coach at Texas. So like where I ranked him 8th, just kind of out of bewilderment. I don't know. You could make a case that he's up in the top half. You could make a case that he's near the bottom. I really don't know what to do with that guy until he proves himself at Texas.
That really is a fascinating conversation. Like where is Sarkisian? I haven't sat down and actually like tried to rank all these coaches, so I don't know like where exactly I would have him. I'm going to scroll up and look at your list here and see. So you just have him above Matt Wells and Dave Aranda. I think those are totally fair to be the bottom 2 right now. And I don't know. I mean, I'm probably putting Sark above Leipold just because, we've seen him be a Power 5 coach before and at least have some level of success. We still don't know that about Leipold. He's pretty deep into his career to be just now taking over a Power 5 head coaching job. But it is very difficult. And you've got Klieman here, number 6. I think that's fair. Like, I think that's another one that is fairly difficult to figure out exactly where he goes because so much of it is like, what do you consider last year? And I know that us being closer to the situation, we're probably more likely to cut him slack for last year as opposed to if you're an outside observer. But if you take anybody's starting quarterback away from them for basically an entire year, for most of the year, unless you are Oklahoma, unless you are maybe Texas, I don't know what would have happened if Ellinger was out last year, but you take that away from somebody and it just makes such a massive difference. Like not even talking about COVID, just talking about the quarterback situation here. So it's so hard to judge. Like at the end of year 1 with Klieman, I think a lot of people would have said exceeded expectations, probably top half of the league coach. Now after last year, like how do you reconcile that and try and rank him? So I just honestly 6, I think is about where I would have him too.
Yeah, he's really in that, who's hot, who's not conundrum too, because it's kind of hard to remember this based on the way they ended last season. But he started 12-6 here, 8-5, and then 4-1, and the one loss was, kind of explainable because they were playing Arkansas State during a COVID opener when Arkansas State had already had a game under their belts. They had an inherent advantage. But yeah, 12-6, and some of those games were without Skylar Thompson. Everything looked great at that point, and then all of a sudden the wheels came off. So, which one's the real Chris Klieman, right? The one who started 12-6, the one who finished 0-5. For now, I'm gonna cut him some slack. I think last year was, like you said, they didn't have the quarterback. They didn't have a lot of defenders down the stretch. I don't really know how in the world to judge what we saw at the end of last season. So I'll stick them pretty much right in the middle right now and reevaluate next season.
As far as next season goes, I think one of the big question marks is going to be the secondary. And I think we had one of the more interesting offseason storylines we've had in a while with Reggie Stubblefield, who was a transfer from Prairie View A&M, who had juiced up some of his accolades on his Twitter profile page, saying that he had blocked 8 kicks when it looked like really it was more like 3, although it's hard to find definitive stats from Prairie View A&M. Said he was an FCS All-American. That was not accurate. Been like a preseason all-conference kind of a guy, but not an FCS All-American. Like how big of a warning sign is this, for a coaching staff that had preached throughout the offseason, like culture and wanting to make sure they – and by the way, followed through with their actions with the other 6 transfers that they had, like clearly were, by all accounts, very good locker room guys. How surprising and how concerning is it that this pops up now with the guy that they're adding in the secondary, a place where they are kind of desperate for some help, and we are getting pretty late in the process here to be adding somebody.
Yeah, when did he commit? Like 2 weeks ago? Is that how long it's been?
I think it's been like a week and a half. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's been that long, and I'm still not totally sure what to think about the whole embellished stats thing. It's weird. I mean, on one hand, I kind of commend the guy, because it's not like he lied on an official resume or anything. He just put on his Twitter page like, "Hey, coaches, you should look at me. Here's all the amazing things I've done." And it was enough to get him a Kansas State offer. Do I love that some of the stats were exaggerated? No. I mean, he made it sound like he was a 2-time all-conference player when really he was a 2-time preseason all-second teamer from, once from the coaches, one from Phil Steele. And while that's certainly an honor, it's not the same as a 2-time postseason, first team all-SWAC guy like people thought he was. And, maybe I'll cut him some slack on the stats too, even though I couldn't find 8 block kicks in there. Their website was very hard to decipher what his stats were. Even going through it, I basically just had to add up, go through every single year and add them up myself. And even those weren't really, definitive in my mind. I would be more upset if he did something like he hacked into the Prairie View A&M website and made up a bunch of stuff in his official bio and put it there. Like if that's what he did, I'd be like, oh, okay, that's not cool. That shouldn't be out there. But I don't know that there's any like rule against inflating your stats a little bit on Twitter. If it got Kansas State's attention, I'm sure they didn't really offer him because of that. I'm sure they went through and talked to his coaches, figured out what his actual accolades were, watched film, and decided he was worth offering. If they didn't do that, they just blindly said, "Whoa, look at these guys' stats he has on his Twitter page. We should offer him." If they did that, then it's not a good thing. But I don't think that's what happened. I bet they did their research. Bet they did their homework. It's a red flag. It's not the hugest red flag. And honestly, they need a veteran guy in the secondary to come in and help. And I don't think he's going to come in and start. But if he can come in and just take a few snaps away from some guys at safety, maybe play some nickel, and help keep some guys who would otherwise be third string defense off the field, then he's worth the trouble, I think.
Yeah, well, they very much need an extra body or two in the secondary. I mean, they still need at least one. I think you really hope that they can still find a way to land some transfer, although that's going to be increasingly tough. So, like, they really needed him. And that is why I think my radar is up more than it even would be normally, because it's like, okay, there's a better chance that you're going to make a compromise here just because you have such an area of need right there. But to me, it's more like yellow lights. This is not like a red stop sign. I think this is a huge deal. Let's proceed with caution. Like, we'll see how this goes. Feels like they've really done a good job from a culture standpoint with the locker room, getting everybody locked in. They have Malik Knowles, who I think is very important that they were able to convince him to be all in, and he seems to be all in. Skylar's going to be back at quarterback, which I think makes a huge difference. The transfers they've added. in particular, 2 or 3 of them seem to be really good locker room character guys. I think they've done enough that one guy who's going to be here for like 8 months, for one season probably isn't going to mess it up. But at least watch it and monitor it. And, beyond that, there's also just a football conversation here of like, how much trouble is the secondary in? I mean, they are in a spot where it's like they're going to be really reliant on, like, for instance, TJ Smith having his knee hold up as he comes back from an injury, which it looks like things are on track as far as that goes, but like they're going to need it really, really bad.